welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens. Today we're tackling one of the most important geopolitical questions of the 21st century. It is a question that military planners, intelligence agencies, diplomats, economists, and political leaders around the world think about every single day. What would happen if the United States and China, and the world's two most powerful nations, found themselves on a collision course toward a war? Now, before we begin, let's make one thing very clear. This discussion is not about advocating for war. In fact, the reality is quite the opposite. Understanding the consequences of a conflict is often the best way to avoid it. Yet as tensions rise over Taiwan, trade disputes, technological competition, military expansion, cyber warfare, and influence across the globe, many Americans are beginning to ask whether a confrontation between Washington and Beijing is inevitable. Now, to understand where we are today, we first have to understand how we got here. The United States emerged from the ashes of World War II as the dominant global superpower. The American economy was unmatched. The American military was unrivaled. The United States Navy controlled the ocean. American industry fueled reconstruction across Europe and Asia, and the U.S. dollar became the foundation of the modern global financial system. For decades, Americans' influence stretched from Europe to the Pacific, which created a world order that, despite its flaws, placed Washington at the center of global affairs. China's story is very different. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, China experienced international turmoil, foreign intervention, civil war, and economic hardships. Yet beginning in the late 20th century, China launched one of the most remarkable economic transformations in human history. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. The cities expanded at breathtaking speed, and manufacturing exploded. Infrastructure projects connected vast regions of the country, and what was once viewed as a developing nation became a global economic powerhouse. Today, China is not merely another country competing with the United States. It is the first nation in decades with the economic size, industrial capacity, technological potential, and military resources necessary to challenge American influence on a global scale. And what brings us to the central question: what exactly is the threat? The answer depends on who you ask. Some view China primarily as an economic competitor. They point to the loss of manufacturing jobs, the supply chain vulnerabilities, intellectual property disputes, and China's growing influence over critical industries. Others see China as a military threat, citing its rapidly expanding navy, advanced missile systems, cyber capabilities, and strategic ambitions in the Pacific. Still, others view the competition as ideological, arguing that the future global order may be shaped by the competing visions of governance, sovereignty, and international influence. Regardless of where one stands politically, there is little debate that China has become a central focus of the American national security planning. Yet many Americans misunderstood the nature of China's military buildup. China is not attempting to replicate the United States exactly. Beijing is not trying to station military bases across every continent or maintain a carrier strike group in every ocean. Instead, China's military strategy has largely focused on only one objective, making it extremely difficult for foreign militaries to operate near China's shores. Over the past 2 decades, China has invested heavily in anti-ship missiles, air defense systems, cyber warfare units, and satellite capabilities, artificial intelligence programs, and electronic warfare technologies, and a rapidly expanding navy. The goal is not necessarily to project power everywhere. The goal is to dominate the region closest to China and deter any outside intervention. And nowhere is that objective more apparent than in Taiwan. Taiwan remains the single most dangerous flashpoint in U.S. China relations. Beijing considers Taiwan a part of China and has repeatedly stated that the reunification remains a national objective. The United States, meanwhile, maintains a policy of strategic ambiguity while supporting Taiwan's ability to defend itself. Now, this delicate balance has helped preserve the peace for decades, but it remains one of the most volatile geopolitical situations on Earth. If a conflict were to occur, many analysts believe Taiwan would be the most likely trigger. Now, let's talk about the strengths. The United States possesses advantages that no other nation can fully replicate. First, there is the alliance network. America is not alone. The United States maintains relationships with nations throughout Europe, Asia, and the Pacific countries, such as Japan, South Korea, Australia, and numerous NATO allies, which provide strategic depth, military cooperation, and intelligence sharing, and logistical support that dramatically expand American capabilities. Secondly, there is naval power. The United States Navy remains the most capable blue water navy in the world. American aircraft carriers, submarine destroyers, and support vessels operate across the globe. Decades of operational experience have produced a military force capable of projecting power over enormous distances. And third, there is innovation. The United States continues to lead in many areas of the advanced technology, aerospace engineering, software development, intelligence gathering, stealth systems, and the emerging defense technologies. However, America is not without its weak distance is perhaps the most obvious challenge. Any major conflict involving China would likely occur thousands of miles from the continental United States and much closer to Chinese territory. The logistics matter in warfare, and geography often will influence the outcomes more than politicians care to admit. America also faces questions regarding industrial capacity. Like during World War II, the United States became known as the arsenal of democracy because of its extraordinary ability to manufacture weapons, vehicles, ships, and equipment. Today, many analysts question whether the current industrial base could sustain a prolonged conflict against a near peer competitor without significant expansion. Supply chain dependence is another concern. Many critical materials and components in manufacturing processes remain linked to international networks that could become vulnerable during a major crisis. Now let's examine China's strengths. Perhaps China's greatest advantage is geography. The military operations that have been conducted near home territory benefit from a shorter supply lines and established infrastructure and a local support network. Chinese forces would operate closer to their bases and ports and logistics hubs than any American force deployed across the Pacific. China also possesses enormous manufacturing sector, factories that currently produce consumer goods, electronics, and industrial equipment, which could potentially be adopted to support wartime production. Industrial capacity has historically been one of the decisive factors in many major conflicts. China's missile arsenal represents another significant advantage. Over the years, Beijing has developed systems specifically designed to threaten ships, airfields, and military installations operating within the Western Pacific. These capabilities are intended to complicate any military response by outside powers. Yet China has weaknesses as well. One of the most significant is energy dependent. China's economy relies heavily on imported oil and natural gas. Much of that energy travels through maritime routes that could become vulnerable during a prolonged conflict. The Strait of Malacca and other key shipping lanes represent strategic choke points that military planners carefully monitor. China also lacks the extensive alliances, networks, enjoined by the United States. While Beijing maintains partnerships with various nations, it does not possess any equivalent system of formal military alliances capable of providing the same level of global support. And then there is the economy. A large-scale conflict would likely devastate international trade. Factories would slow and markets would plunge. The supply chains would fracture, and the economic consequences would be felt not only in Beijing and Washington, but in virtually every country on earth. And now here's where things become even more complicated. Many people imagine future wars through the lens of previous conflicts. They envision tanks crossing borders, soldiers storming beaches, and fleets exchanging fire on the open sea. Now, while those elements could still exist, a modern conflict between the United States and China would likely begin in a very different way. Cyber warfare could become one of the first battlefields. Communication networks, banking systems, transportation infrastructure, power grids, and government systems could all become targets. A successful cyber attack might disrupt daily life without a single shot being fired. Space would also become a critical domain. Modern militaries depend heavily on satellites for communication, navigation, intelligence gathering, and missile warning systems. Disruptions in space could affect operations on land at sea, and in the air. Economic warfare would likely accompany military action. Sanctions, export controls, financial restrictions, technology bans, and trade disruptions could become powerful weapons in their own right. And then we arrive at the most important factor of all: nuclear deterrence. Unlike previous great power conflicts, both the United States and China possess nuclear arsenals capable of inflicting catastrophic damage. This reality fundamentally changes strategic calculations. Military planners are not simply trying to win, they are trying to avoid escalation that could spiral into a disaster unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. This is why many experts argue that victory in modern U.S. China conflicts would not look like victory in World War II. There would be no surrender ceremony aboard a battleship. There would be no occupation of the opposing capital. There would be no simple declaration of total victory. Instead, success would likely be measured by the political objectives. Could a nation protect its allies? Could it maintain access to critical trade routes? Or could it preserve economic stability? Heck, could it deter aggression without triggering wider escalation? And could it achieve strategic goals while avoiding nuclear catastrophe? These questions matter because the future competition between America and China may ultimately be decided not by military force alone, but by economics, technology, innovation, diplomacy, demographics, industrial strength, and national resilience. The truth is that the greatest competition between Washington and Beijing is already underway. It is occurring in semiconductor manufacturing, artificial intelligence, shipbuilding, cybersecurity, energy development, telecommunications, education, our financial systems, and global influence. The battlefield of the future may look very different from the battlefield of the past. As Americans, it is important to approach these discussions with seriousness rather than fear. China is a powerful competitor. The challenges are real and the stakes are significant, but history teaches us that the nations often make their worst decisions when driven by panic rather than strategy. The goal should not be endless confrontation. The goal should not be strength, or the goal should be strength, deterrence, preparedness, and peace through stability. A strong America, a resilient economy, secure supply chains, technological leadership, and robust alliances, and informed citizens are far more valuable than reckless escalation. Because when we talk about a potential conflict between the United States and China, we're not talking about two distant rivals arguing over territory. We're talking about the two largest economies on Earth, two military superpowers, and two nations whose decisions will shape the future of the world for generations to come. And that is why understanding this rivalry may be one of the most important conversations of our time. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Unfiltered Political Lens. If you enjoyed this monologue, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Is a U.S. China conflict inevitable, or can the strategic competition remain peaceful? We look forward to hearing your perspective. We'll see you in the next episode. As always, peace.